just a very brief review from last time. We talked about Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva. Actually, well, let me repeat the line that we were looking at. The line is from the Heart Sutra, of course. It's Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva, when deeply practicing Prajñāpāramitāhṛdaya, clearly saw that all 5 skandhas are empty. So it's taken a while just to get through this one sentence, but we'll probably go more quickly once we get through the first sentence. But we said that Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva, basically in my interpretation and in my teachers and just in, I think, Dogen Zenji's lineage, Avalokiteshvara is the life we live itself. It's our Zazen practice. It's this world that we live in. It's the looked at from the perspective of compassion or healing. So it's he or she is the bodhisattva that brings us to awakening through that life force to heal. And we talked a lot about that last time, so we'll keep going on. When he or she was practicing deeply Prajñāpāramitāhṛdaya, that is our Zazen. Avalokiteshvara is our Zazen, and the practice of Prajñāpāramitāhṛdaya is Zazen, and the clear seeing is Zazen. But we can see each of these things from kind of a different perspective. We talked about the true Dharma eye, or the Dharma eye of the Bodhisattva that sees reality with the wisdom of unity and the compassion of individuality. So both of those things together, the Dharma eye is the wisdom eye that sees the differences in our life in order to make an offering. So that's a very short synopsis of the true Dharma eye. But now let's talk about the 5 skandhas. So what we can do with that first, I think, is just to talk about them in relation to the Buddhist teaching, or early Buddhist teaching. So the 5 skandhas, of course, or the 5 khandhas in Pali, are a very foundational. This word skandha can be translated, many different ways. You see like heaps or aggregates. I like to actually just keep the word skandhas because I don't think any of these words, from what I understand, really communicate what it means. Red Pine said that actually, and I've heard this other places too, that the literal translation is like something like trunk, like the trunk of a tree. And to me, that seems pretty appropriate actually, because that reminds me of like a pillar that holds up this false illusion of self or individuality. So to me, it seems like a good way to refer to them is maybe the 5 trunks, but I've never seen that anywhere. But also, the Buddha back in the early text used the analogy or the metaphor of a tree, a banana tree, when he was talking about the 5 skandhas too. So I think it's a good way to look at it. So the 5 skandhas are a way to look at our experience. They're not some kind of a theory to necessarily, at least in the Buddha's original teaching, they're not some kind of theory about self or something that is really outside of our experience. They're a way to examine the way that we cling to this notion of self, which in the Buddhist teaching and early Buddhism is really a foundational or a key idea. Like this ignorance, this fundamental ignorance that causes suffering, is the ignorance about self. Like we impute a self on these five skandhas. So, any one of those skandhas we can grasp or cling to as self. And so the I-making, the Buddha called it, is the problem that happens as a result of clinging, to these five skandhas. We interpret everything that we experience as, the Four Noble Truths, which we'll talk about later too, next time or the time after, I can't remember. We'll discuss that, the Four Noble Truths. But he emphasized craving. So he emphasized different things or different conditions in different teachings, because in the teaching of the Five Skandha, he really emphasized clinging or upadana. And so even actually the skandhas are called, upadana skandhas. He talks about the upadana skandhas. And he also talked about the skandhas after we don't cling to them. He talked about departing from the five skandhas. That was one way that he talked about awakening, was that we depart from the five skandhas. So, just in review again, early Buddhism really emphasized this teaching of samsara as a literal thing that happens from lifetime over lifetime to an individual being. So we're reborn in this cycle of samsara, and of course we know that we are reborn from moment to moment in this cycle too. But the orthodox teaching is that the point of practice is to escape this cycle of rebirth over and over again in these six realms of suffering. So one of the ways that we do that is, or the Buddha described that, was to say that we depart from the five skandhas and we don't cling to this notion of self anymore. That's the wisdom that arises, that is the medicine for the ignorance of being invested in an individual self. So anyway, so that was the medicine, of course, is to leave this cycle of samsara and go over the river between samsara and nirvana and reach nirvana, the end of suffering, and escape. So anyway, as I was saying, he described this as departing from the five skandhas, but I think, in our teaching, Dogen Zenji really said the same thing, because he called our Zazen practice dropping off body and mind. And this, I think, is related directly to the five skandhas. So he didn't say that we do Zazen in order to drop off body and mind. He said Zazen is dropping off body and mind. Actually, his teacher said that. He got that from Yojo Zenji. And so it's not a means to do something. That Zazen itself is dropping off body and mind, or departing from the five skandhas. And, because one of the skandhas is body and the rest of the four are mind. Or, the first one is Rupa skandha, is form, and that's the body and all material things. And so I talked about as, the five skandhas or nama-rupa. And so Dogen Zenji said, dropping off body and mind, departing from the five skandhas, is Zazen. So we'll talk about that more later, but of course, when we sit in Zazen, we're not clinging to anything. We let the five skandhas arise. They do arise, the feelings, sensations, formations, all of the conceptual ideas and the sensations in the body, our karmic volition, all of that is arising in the mind and in the body, but we let it go. That's what Uchama Roshi called opening the hand of thought. And so in Shikantaza, we let these things arise, and then we let them go. We actually endeavor just to hands off from the beginning, but usually we find ourselves, of course, clinging to them even in our zazen, and when we find that, we just let go. So in Dogen Zenji's teaching, that I think is departing from the five skandhas. Anyway, so let's examine these five skandhas, and let's see if the document here showed up that has them on here. Okay, so I think it's best to study the five skandhas with their Sanskrit or Pali name, because it can get confusing because there are different translations of them, and especially with Vedana and Samja, I think they're sometimes translated interchangeably. So anyway, Rupa Skandha is just the body or the experience of material form, and it's kind of the Buddha didn't make a distinction between internal and external form. So it's when you start thinking about this philosophically, it's really can be interpreted so many different ways. But Rupa Skandha is the body basically, and any material form that we experience. That and he makes no comment as to whether it exists outside of our experience. It's not the point. But then Vedana Skandha is this kind of the evaluation of our experience, the sensory stimulation of the form. So he said that can be pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. And these are all different ways that we cling to a self. We cling to the self as the body, or we cling to it. We can evaluate our sensations, and we cling to them sometimes as self, or saying that is the self, the experience of self. Samya Skandha, and I'll do my best on the pronunciations, but that is feelings and or images, representations in the mind. So it's kind of the consciousness of the sensations of the mind. It's this is the one. Let's see. I think this is more of the attending to. I get these two mixed up. Actually, Vedana and Samja. Some of these are so precise and they overlap. So the attending to is Samja, I think. And samskara is usually what we think of as volition. And this is a really all-encompassing skandha. It's really the interesting one that colors all of the other skandhas, really. This is where, our memories are, to me, it's probably where our deep-seated sensation of self comes from. Usually, you see this translated as volition, but it's much more than that. It's also our karmic tendencies, the things that colors our experience. So, and vijnana is consciousness, and that actually means to split things in two. So consciousness is pretty self-evident. That's where we're making a copy of reality and consciously attending to it with the subject-object relationship. Let's see if there's anything I wanted to. Yeah, samja is the attending to objects of Vedana. So samja is the attending to, of these sensations. And these kind of overlap, and you can see they're not, it's not a precise kind of theory, and it could be interpreted different ways, and they have been interpreted like, different ways throughout the centuries. So anyway, I thought it would be interesting to kind of look at an example of how these occur in our life, like in our just a basic experience. So let's say it's an experience of a sunset arising, and how we experience that. So we can say the actual color of the orange, bright color in the sky of actually it was a sunrise here, I think, right? I did this a while ago. One way or the other, it's a bright yellow formation in the sky that we say, is form, like the clouds and the light on the clouds in the sky. So that's rupa. And actually the rupa is also the sense organ that meets that experience. So whether those things are separate, it's not for this discussion, but so the sensation of dhandana, of that pleasant yellow-orange visual sensation, that's dhandana. So we consider that pleasant usually. There's a possibility that somebody may have had a bad experience during a sunrise or sunset and would not experience it, pleasantly. That would be, there's some skandha would interpret it differently. But anyway, attending to the experience, recognizing that we're having the experience would be, stop. And then, as I say, the important one to me, the really important one, the samskara, is thinking of or memories coming up of past pleasant experiences during the sunset, or other associations of, being on the beach, or an experience you had as a child. Based on that, we would probably get up. If we like a sunset, we'd get up and go out and look at it. That's a volitional impulse of samskara. And then when the jnana, so we just say, oh, it's a sunrise, and we expect something to happen. We categorize this in the same categories of other sunrises we've had, and we might think about it in terms of the passing of time and what we're going to experience based on other sunsets. So any of these things, kind of the point of these experiences, if we go and look deeply into them, we always see that there's something else, and there's no permanent owner or operator in any one of these, that they're all changing all of the time. And so that in itself, the fact that these skandhas are always changing, shows us that we're not they don't have some kind of deep-seated operator or ghost in the machine there that's running the show. There's nothing in them that we can ever find that's the same every time. And this will be maybe more important as we talk about this later. Okay, that's all I had for that one. So one thing that I think, it's interesting, the existence of a permanent self is really dependent, on these skandhas. You can see in that experience, like the memory of past experiences of a sunset is really key. Like our memory, the samskara is really important in producing this experience of a self, because we have a memory of a past self that experienced the sunset, and we say that's the same self that's experiencing this one. When in fact, if we look at this, we realize that we can only infer that, we can only experience a memory in the present. Any experience of a past sunset is only actually happening in this moment. So we're making a big inference. It's a good inference, of course, but it's not the actual same self, because, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, because, if that sunset was 5 years ago, we're different. That's a different person than experienced the last sunset. But we infer that it was the same one. And so, linear time is another thing that we experience that's very key in samskara. And I think that's why Dogen Zenji spent so much time, or one of the reasons, that he spent so much time on these, so much time on explaining time, or, expounding how time is empty. And, he wrote a fascicle of Shobogenzo called, very popular and deep fascicle that a lot of people study. And there, I won't talk about that, but basically my teacher talks about this in a way, and I think what Uji is saying is that, the past is already gone and the future isn't here yet, is one of the things that it's saying. So all that we ever have is the future, is the present moment. And, when we really look at the present moment, it has no length of time. So, my teacher always uses this example. If it had any length of time, you could cut it in two, into past and future. So, if 1 minute was the moment of time, you could cut it in two. And so you can see how you can get into the weeds with these kinds of things. And actually, Abhidharma scholars did. They tried to, cut down time into the smallest element and define it. And, part of what the Heart Sutra is reacting against is those kinds of things that say, time is real. When we really look at time, we see that from the perspective of our personal experience, there's only the now ever. But samskara tells us that there was a past self that experienced it that is the same one as this one. But if we really analyze it, we see that it's not, because we analyze any of those other skandhas and we see that they have changed since then. So we're not the same person, it's not the same phenomena. Impermanence is, and that's why impermanence is the key foundational teaching of the Buddha too. The Buddha was really talking about this stuff too. Shobogenzo Uji is just, to me, expounding on the Buddha's teaching. It's not some real innovation. Anyway, this was a way to talk about emptiness. So here we're starting to talk about emptiness. Avalokiteshvara saw the skandhas were empty and thus relieved all suffering. So this kind of emptiness, early Buddhism, is emptiness of self. And there's usually a difference made between that, early kind of talking about emptiness in the way that we talk about it in the Mahāprajñāpāramitāhṛdaya Sutras or in the Mahayana Sutras. But really, I think the roots of Prajnaparamita teachings are in these early teachings, if we really look at them a little more closely. But that's interesting, to me. And it shows to me, I think, the Heart Sutra is really trying to go back to the original teachings of the Buddha, and, after some period of real complicating of the teachings through getting, very technical and really deeply into the weeds with his teachings. So, but if we, one thing we can say, if we look at any of those skandhas, as I was saying before, they're always changing and they're conditioned by other things. And that's, in Mahayana Buddhism, that's basically the way we define emptiness is non-self or interconnection and impermanence. So the impermanence part is very clear, in early Buddhism. Early Buddhism talked about dependent origination, which we will discuss when we talk about the 12-fold chain. But it didn't, Buddha didn't talk about it on the level outside of the self, really. So that dependent origination is really kind of a one-way chain. But if we look at them, if we look at the way conditioned experience was presented, I think we see the roots of Prajñāpāramitāhṛdaya here. Let's see what else we wanted to say. So one way I think we can do that is through examining this little, this actually kind of a larger, not such a small sutra, but it's actually not large as sutras go, but it's actually a piece of one. I sent it from what I thought we were going to talk about the Five Skandhas before, but let me see if I can bring it up here. This is from the early canon, from Pali Canon, and let's see if we can customize that. Oh, maybe it was on here after all. Darn. I always think I'm more organized than I am. I don't know why, but I thought I had it. Well, I don't know where it is. Okay. Well, maybe you guys have read it. I thought it was on the other document, but it's not. So basically, in this sutta, the Buddha talks about the five skandhas and the emptiness of self. I won't read the whole thing, but I'll read pieces of it here. So it starts out that he, was addressing his monks, and the Buddha says, suppose that a large glob of foam were floating down the Ganges River, and a man with good eyesight were to see it, observe it, and appropriately examine it. To him, seeing it, observing it, and appropriately examining it, it would appear empty, void, without substance. For what substance would there be in a glob of foam? In the same way, a monk sees, observes, and appropriately examines any form, rupa, that is past, future, or present, internal or external, blatant or subtle, common or sublime, far or near. To him, seeing and observing it, and appropriately examining it, it would appear empty, void, without substance. For what substance would there be in form? So this is pretty amazing to me. The Buddha is just saying that the Rupa Skandha is empty of self. The main thing he's talking about here is empty of self, but he doesn't really even specify that. And then he says that any rupa, internal or external. This to me is mind-blowing. The rupa skandha happening in, does it happen in us, in the mind, or outside? So to me, this is kind of he was commenting on all form, or it wasn't making a distinction between our experience of form and the world in general, the objective world that we assume. So, it really, to me, you're starting to see the roots of Mahayana emptiness, I think, in this kind of speaking. So he says the same thing about, the Dhamma Skandha. He compares that to a water bubble. If you examine it, you see that it's void, empty, past and future. Observing it, it would appear empty, void, without substance. For what substance would there be in feeling? And he goes through each. He compares samya to a mirage. He compares samskara to a banana tree or some kind of tree. And so this one is actually very interesting too. I think I sent you the references on this thing that I can send it to you again. But he says, suppose a man desiring heartwood, in quest of seeking heartwood, were to go into a forest carrying a sharp axe. There he would see a large banana tree, so forth, enormous of height. He would cut it, the root, et cetera, chop off the top. So he's looking for heartwood. He's looking for a self, or he's looking for something permanent and unchanging, basically, is the metaphor in the banana tree. Apparently, they grow in layers like an onion. And he says that you would just keep peeling off each layer of the banana tree, and you find nothing in there. That's why he compared the samskara to a banana tree, because you take off the layers and there's no heartwood in it. It's like a large onion, layers of an onion. So to me, that's really interesting. It's really amazing to me. And he says the same thing about vijnana, consciousness, but he compares that to a magic trick. If you meet somebody going down the road, he said, a magician, I guess, a fortune teller, and they did a magic trick. If you sat there and you actually asked that it was a trick, it was you're being fooled by your senses somehow. And that's our experience of self. We're being fooled in a way by our consciousness or our experience of self if we believe in it. It's a reality that's arising in our experiences, but if we cling to it, it's an illusion. It's like a magic trick that we're fooled by. We believe in this, kind of magic trick. And so anyway, in these things that he says about the skandhas, it's very clear that he's saying they're empty of self. But I think, if you think about it too, what he's implying, if you looked at any piece of that banana tree, if you looked at one of the layers of it too, you would see that was just water and, the plant material. I can't remember what it's called, but you would also see that is made up of constituent parts. You wouldn't find the heartwood there either. He's just assuming that. You don't come back to this place where building block that can't ever be separated, in anything. And of course, it's amazing that science is telling us this kind of thing too. Yeah. Now, to the, but it is saying something similar here. I think things are relationships to this. That's the implied thing here. I think that we can see. So. Anyway, I think this is, we can see the roots of the Prajnaparamita teachings here, I think, really. So as I said earlier, in Mahayana teaching, we define, emptiness as impermanence and non-self, or interconnection. Interconnection and non-self are kind of interchangeable. You can talk about it in a positive or a negative, way. So, one other way I'd like to talk about this then is through talking about another early sutta from the canon. And this one I sent out to you before too. And actually, I think all of these are available now in the folder where you can watch the video. There in a folder next to the videos too, if you're interested in looking at these things. But this is the Kaccayana Sutta. I sent it out, a few weeks ago. And I know I do have this one here. Okay, so here we hear the Buddha being asked a question by Kaccayana, and he asked, right view is the right view. And just a side note, my teacher really doesn't like this translation, own anything. So to compare him to a Lord is kind of strange, but I know they're probably just trying to borrow from Christian. The Christian tradition to make it. And the Buddha says, make sure you guys can read it. The Buddha says, the world in general, Kaccayana, inclines to two views, to existence or to non-existence. But for him who, with the highest wisdom, sees the uprising of the world as it really is, non-existence of the world does not apply. So the one who sees the uprising of the world, non-existence of the world, does not apply. And for him who, with the highest wisdom, sees the passing away of the world as it really is, existence of the world does not apply. The world in general, Kaccayana, grasps after systems and is imprisoned by dogmas. But he does not go along with that system grasping, the one who sees, I think he's referring to. The one who sees does not go along with that grasping, he or she, we should say. Doesn't go along with the system grasping, the mental obstinacy and dogmatic bias. Does not grasp it at all, does not affirm, this is myself. He knows without doubt or hesitation that whatever arises is merely dukkha, and that what passes away is merely not depending on anyone else. This, Kaccayana, is what constitutes right view. So everything exists. This is one extreme. Nothing exists. This is the other extreme. Avoiding both extremes, the Tathagata teaches a doctrine of the middle, conditioned by ignorance, our formations. Now this next part here is just basically a presentation of the 12-fold chain which we will talk about. But basically what he's saying at this last part is that this is a statement of dependent origination. So to me, in this, first of all, in this sutta, you see impermanence. So like he clearly states that impermanence is part of emptiness. And here he's saying dependent origination, I think, is part of emptiness too. So the arising of the world as it is dependent origination. And the passing away of the world as it is impermanence. And so we don't cling to either one of these views because they're actually one. We can't even say they're one and the same, but they are completely each other. Yet, here you see the roots of Nagarjuna and the Prajñāpāramitāhṛdaya teachings quite clearly. But the middle way itself is practice. So this, not clinging to things as they arise and not clinging to things as they pass away, that view, not going into eternalism or nihilism, is zazen or practice. It's not some view. It's not a view. I mean, the right view is the practice of Prajñāpāramitāhṛdaya or our zazen practice. So this is a very early sutta. If we look at it a little bit more closely, you can see that, for example, how do we mean that interconnection and impermanence are the same thing or completely interpenetrated? The Nagarjuna would say that, or the Heart Sutra says form and is emptiness, emptiness is form. Or the two truths that Nagarjuna talked about, which we'll study next time. He said these two truths are expressions of each other or completely interpenetrated too. So what does that mean, for example? I think I can stop the sharing now. So when I talk about this often, so I'm sorry if it's repeating to some of you, but we see the arising of a person, or often I use the example of myself just the way my teacher does. But we can talk about it in terms of a seed. The Lotus Sutra uses this example also, or the seed, and it turns into a sapling, and then we say, this is the way we say it conventionally, that it turns then into a tree. But there's no, clear delineation between those stages, for one thing. But if we want to look at it from the point of dependent arising, or from cause and effect, is what we're really talking about here, or conventional wisdom, the seed, the acorn, the birth of the acorn, the arising of the sapling is the passing away of the acorn. In conventional terms. So the death of the acorn is the birth of the sapling, and the death of the sapling is the birth of the tree, for example. Effect of the cause and effect, that's one, actually that's both of them, but we can say through cause and effect that, the cause of the tree is the acorn, but actually the acorn, and the tree are completely different things. An acorn is not a tree. but at the same time, the tree would not exist without the acorn. There is some connection. So from the perspective of cause and effect, the acorn and the tree are completely connected. But from the perspective of impermanence, they're completely different and not the same. And actually, both of these things are true at once, depending on which perspective we want to take. In relation to myself, something I gave a talk some years ago where I did this bad thing when I was a teenager and, ran away from home and gave my parents a lot of difficulty. And I started thinking about it years later that I'd never resolved that issue, like I'd never talked to them about it. We all just sort of skimmed over it. And I really struggled because I didn't like the 13-year-old boy that did that. I was like, what a jerk, And at the same time, I went back and studied the conditions of why that arose. In my life, I tried to give the kid a break and look at what was going on in his life and see cause and effect, and it actually to accept him a bit more and also understand that he was completely, affecting me and conditioning me, but at the same time, not me at all. So this, forgiveness or this compassion of Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva is in this present moment, we're forgiven of our sins, so to speak. I'm forgiven for being a 13-year-old jerk that caused his parents a lot of hell for no apparent reason, but actually there was some reason around it. All of those things were empty and conditioned too that made me do them. But that Bodhisattva in this here, which is this here and now. And so I'll look at it as cause and effect or as emptiness, as not emptiness, but impermanence and non-self. And that, that itself is emptiness, like both of those things together. I could talk about other times in my life too, where this teaching has been very helpful, because if we can say, yes, I'm forgiven by Kanon Bodhisattva, or I'm forgiven by Avalokiteshvara, can't take responsibility, because, we have to take responsibility. That is part of the forgiveness. Like if we just say, if I would have just said, well, that's the past, and my parents had, that's not the Buddhist teaching. We have to still deal with cause and effect, and that's part, the Katyayana Sutta is saying that. So, like I went back to my parents and said, I tried to talk to them about it and say, what was going on, and ask them how it was for them. And I mean, it was kind of a late, it was 40, like, it was better than nothing, I guess, but it was still somehow, I felt like, trying to deal with the karma. And I think part of the reason there was so much suffering around it for me still was I hadn't embraced the karma of it, and what things it was causing, that was conditioning the things in my present life due to that event. So we have both of these things of dependent arising, cause and effect, and emptiness, or not, I keep saying emptiness, but it's actually impermanence, which is, both of these things together are emptiness, like interconnection, cause and effect, and impermanence. And the reason these teachings are so difficult is it seems like these things are completely opposite of each other, but they're actually one. You know, you can't say anything about them because they're not the same and they're not different. They're, you know, they say boy is the negation of the, you know, 12-year-old boy, or so we can't say anything about it. Ultimately, it's true. We can say a lot about it, and we do. That's what we're doing now. But none of it really is true. You know, none of it is the real essence of it. It's so that the real essence of it is our zazen, or, you know, there's no essence, but the real expression of it is our zazen and our practice off of the mission being informed by our zazen. I guess that's a good place to stop. I had a little bit more, but I think I'll stop because I'll go over if I continue with this. So if anybody has any comments about today, what we talked about, or questions, we can open it up for that.
Yeah, I had a kind of question about the skandhas. From the notes that I was taking, it seems like each skandha is either a relationship between subject and object, or a relationship between like the object and cause and effect, or time with that relationship. And Dogen talked about dropping off body and mind. So does the concept of emptiness mean be weary of the relationship between subject, object, and time? Or is it realize they're all the same thing? Does the question make sense?
I think so, yes. I think you're asking, does you know, the teaching tell us to be cautious about the subject-object relationship and time? Or is it telling us we need to, you know, shy away now, say that they're Mara or something to that effect, or something that is not beneficial?
Yeah. Yeah.
More cautious, like something that the real teaching, I think, in Zazen is that we don't do anything with these relationships. You know, we don't negate, and relationship to it is the point. Like, if we really cling to that as real, the subject-object relationship, we have a problem. But at the same time, we can only, that subject-object relationship is actually Prajñāpāramitāhṛdaya. So that's part of what the Heart Sutra is saying, is that when we cling, we have a problem, yes. When we practice, we express. You know, we can talk about it like linear time is a problem if we latch onto that as real. That's definitely true. But we also understand that we can't live without it, and that it is an expression of Prajñāpāramitāhṛdaya if we practice with it. I can either go into despair about being a 13-year-old boy that, wrecked his sister's car. I can say, what a jerk I was, that really sucked and I'm no good. Or I can say, if I want to stay on the side of like, that was then, this is now, that's not me. I don't care. I have nothing to do, it doesn't have anything to do with me. Really, I'm not a 13-year-old boy, and that was 40 years ago. So either one of those places is a problem. But linear time allows me to actually practice, in the here and now, and practice with that, with that relationship. Practice with my relationship with that self. Linear time allows us, as I say, to show up and talk to each other at a certain time. So if I say linear time doesn't exist at all, and that wasn't me, it's a problem. Or if I say linear time doesn't exist because it's an eternal now, that's a problem. So that would be my answer to that, unless you wanted me to talk more about it, if I didn't answer your question.
Thank you.
You're welcome, sure.
Thank you, Shoryu, for the talk. So we have this 5 skandhas, sensations, perceptions, like form, sensations, perceptions, formations, consciousness. So knowing that these are empty, right? But in our regular life, that's not my experience. It's not my experience that they're empty. How do we live the regular life in a kind way, or in a knowledgeable way, knowing this, but then that they're not my experience. That's one. And the second question is so once you see the non-separation, or once you drop the body, mind, or enlightenment, or this thing, right? So what parts change? Like, you still, I think, have these sensations, right? And then perceptions, you perceive them as pleasant or unpleasant. But then the formations part, I think that's where right now it is difficult for someone who has not realized the truth to see, okay, the formations, what are my formations are different from, let's say, your formations. And then the consciousness, I think that also changes. I want to understand that as well.
Yeah, so I think your first question then is, how do we deal with these 5 skandhas in our regular life? Like, how do we cope with samskara, for example, in our everyday life, and how do we express prajnaparamita, knowing that we have, these 5 skandhas that are the source of delusion. And that's your first question, I think, right? So yes, it's a very good question. It's a deep question for us all of the time, and we'll study it in more depth, I think. But the basic, I've said this before, I think the basic way we try to do that, we endeavor to do that, is through expressing everything we do in our life as part of our zazen. So it's a matter of understanding our interactions, everything in our life as an expression, of emptiness. And, that's the formation, that's the foundation of our, of our life. That's the basic foundation of our life. So when anger arises, we're always endeavoring to not do this. So, for example, but, Dogen Zenji talked about the three minds, magnanimous mind, nurturing mind, and joyful mind as a way to bring this Prajñāpāramitāhṛdaya or non-clinging or zazen, into our daily practice, into our daily life, in our relationship with others. So, for example, when he said, when we meet anything, we see that as Buddha. It's just an attitude, that's magnanimous mind. Everything is Buddha. So my anger is Buddha. Usually we cling to that anger as either wrong or true, or like you really are an ass. You did something bad to me, and you really are an ass. As where we in practice, that thought can come up, but we are not going to do this. So this is a subtle practice, that's directly informed by our zazen practice. I think, that's the magnanimous mind is basically, the mind, he said, like the mind of a mountain where everything is welcome. Birds can come to a mountain, and, in rain, snow, sunshine, all of those things, the mountain can hold it, and it doesn't say to any of those, you can come, but you can't come, So ultimately, all of our thoughts, all of our five skandhas are welcome. That's magnanimous mind. And everything is my life. That's what Uchama Roshi said. Everything I encounter is my life. That was his way of saying that. So his way of expressing, nurturing mind was that as bodhisattvas, once we understand that everything is our life, we care for that as self. We actually don't discriminate this way between self and other, or self and not self. But that was the nurturing mind, the attitude of everything I encounter is my life, therefore I take care of it, I nurture it. I don't do the things that I don't like and attend to the things that I do like, or welcome the skandhas the things that feel good, and reject the things that don't feel good. But I, practice with those things. And out of that, a sense of joy comes. He said that's, the real joyful mind, the human heart opens, and I think, and this is what, Buddha was saying, is that a human being really finds their joy in making an offering. And I think that's what these suttas are telling us, and, the Prajñāpāramitāhṛdaya Sutras and Avalokiteshvara tells us that, we really find our joy in making an offering, our overall joy in life. It's not like we're walking around with a smile on our face all the time, but, we're going to be happy and sad sometimes. But overall, when we find our place in this five skandhas, in this Indra's net, that we can make an offering that is an offering to the whole net and an offering to ourselves, we find joy. So it's not like we have to do something we don't want to do. We don't have to just have it be drudgery and try to be something other than we are. We find our place in this net and what our offering can be. I think. So maybe that's enough for that one. And now, as usual, I've forgotten your second one. If you just remind me.
Yeah.
Remind me again quickly.
Is, I'm trying to understand the difference between someone who has dropped body-mind and someone who is still on the way practicing, right? In terms of these five skandhas, what is different in a, like, let's say, sensations, perceptions are still, I think, there. But I think the formations are different, or consciousness obviously will be empty, or I just want to understand that part, the difference between.
Yes. Okay. So I think you're asking what it changes in a person when they drop off body and mind. So, what in the five skandhas, if anything, has changed. And so, we could probably say a lot about that, but the main thing to understand, I think, about Dogen Zenji's teaching was that he said dropping off body and mind is equal to our zazen. So it isn't an experience in the way that we talk about it. We've dropped off all the skandhas, so there's no person or thing to experience things. It is an expression of truth. It's not an event. It itself is enlightenment. In Dogen Zenji's teaching, enlightenment includes the entirety of the universe. It doesn't include. It's not confined to one person. It can't be one person's possession or one person's experience, and they think about it. So if you ask this to Sawaki Roshi, he would probably say absolutely nothing has changed. He would say zazen is good for nothing and no difference whatsoever. And in some sense, that's true. I think that that's really true. We want to probably say that if we want to understand the real profundity of Dogen Zenji's teaching, because the teaching is that these five skandhas themselves are an expression of enlightenment when we practice with them. But that being said, when we make this the center of our life, when we start living by vow, when we say, I want to live according to zazen or vow, or Manjushri's wisdom, or Buddha's eye, or whatever you want to call it, or Buddha nature, when you say that, there's a fundamental shift in our direction as a human being, and we're completely changed on some level, in some way. But that's Buddha's change, really. That's not ours. That's, Buddha does that, or zazen does that, or so there might be some change. There's definitely a change in me from the time that I was 13, and the values that I have, and even from years ago when I started practicing, there's definitely a change, and a lot of those are just because of the impermanence, but also living with a direction in life and a vow rather than trying to get your needs met and avoid what you don't like is a real shift in a person's, life. But we have to be careful because most of, I know for me, it's going to take me a few million more kalpas to be completely immaculate. As far as, the Bodhisattva vow goes. And so in a way, it's not very encouraging when we really think about it, like the work we would really have to do to express perfectly, a human being as, as a Buddha, in one way of talking about it. If we chase around that carrot, we're into samsara. So again, there's two sides. On one side, absolutely nothing changes. From the impermanence or the kind of absolute perspective, there's no change at all. And from another perspective, everything has changed. Our entire world changes. But that's Buddha's change. It's not ours, or it's the universe has changed. In Pure Land Buddhism, they talk about this. At least some sects, the Japanese sects, they talk about Amitabha's vow. This Buddha that made a vow to set up this Pure Land where everybody could practice and attain enlightenment. And that was his vow, like actually just to awaken every being. And so basically, we can say that vow of, one way we talk about it, that vow of that Buddha is what shifts the change in us. That's a way of saying it's something a lot bigger than us. Or we can call it, that universal vow, that vow of Amitabha, or just the life force, or, Prajñāpāramitāhṛdaya. But anytime we call it something, we make a mistake, of course. So if we really think it's some Buddha in the celestial realm, that's kind of a mistake. Or if we really think that it's something called Prajñāpāramitāhṛdaya, or if it's something, called the universe that has a boundary around it, or, that's a mistake. So, but all of these things are just ways to get us to do Zazen. They're just ways to inform our faith, to let go and let Abhidhamma do his thing. or let Prajñāpāramitāhṛdaya manifest, whatever way you want to talk about it. But we definitely have a part in that. We have to do our part. It's not like, you have to show up for the cushion, on the cushion, and you have to take responsibility for your mistakes. And but in the end, it's the tiny drop in the ocean what we can do. But when we give over, when we surrender, or whatever you want to call it, or just let go, or drop off body and mind, something very deep, expresses itself beyond the individual. You're welcome. You're welcome.
I had a quick question. That's all right.
Yes, was that Jared? Yes, Jared.
Would you say that what you were mentioning, Indra's net earlier, between like the early Buddhist dependent origination and sort of that avatamsaka interdependence, Indra's net idea, would you say there's much of a conceptual difference? And at least the Cleary translation is a bit of a tome and a little difficult to get through, so maybe I didn't get to that part yet. Your thoughts?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's something that a lot of people thought about. I've thought about that a lot, and I think I think it's different. The way it's expressed it's quite a different way of expressing it. So if you really stick to what's written in those texts, the dependent origination just has a one-way, back and forth. It's just one chain, really, as far as what the Buddha explicitly said and what dependent origination really was. It just starts out with ignorance, and goes through all these different states and rebirth, and it's like a cycle. And then if you break that chain, then all of those things will subside, and that's nirvana. All of those things. Also, the teaching is that if you break one, the others will pass away too. And I think that was the real. It was different, but it became expressed differently as far as the explicit way of talking about it. But to me, I've thought about it a lot, and I think that there are really openings where inferences are made where we can go to Indra's net, and that's what Mahayana Buddhists did. I feel like my guess is, I'm just guessing, and I have no idea really, of course, that the Buddha was he was really careful to, he knew that he could, that if he said too much, that it could really be taken in an unhealthy direction. So he was really, in that day, and in that culture, he really just tried to say in a way that differentiated it from what other people were saying, and so that people would precisely know exactly what he meant. But you find all these openings where he doesn't make a distinction between the subject inside the person, the object inside the person, and the object outside. He left the opening there, like he said in the Rupa Skandha, that they're all empty, whether it's internal or external. So he didn't explicitly go and say everything in Indra's net is empty, or everything in the objective world is empty. But he left the opening there, and he made sure that, I think he just wanted to make sure that he was letting people know that he wasn't concerned with that. He was just addressing people's suffering and expressing a way to remedy it in the best way he felt for the audience that he was talking to. And, later generations and different cultures needed something different. And then I think, right after the Buddha passed away, things got into the weeds with the philosophical, exposition, expounding, and these other teachings were a way of just going back to what really counted to people, what really meant something in people's particular culture and people's particular time. And the sutras that exist, that are ones often, I think, that really have some universal application. Sometimes it's hard for us to find them when they talk about these Buddhas, emanating through each other's eyebrows and stuff. We look at that and think, what does that have to do with today at all? But once we really start looking at them, we find, the teachings there, and that apply universally, I think. So, but anyway, to go back to your question, I think it's a different thing. It's a different expression, but it's there. It's definitely possible to find it. But if the Theravadins would tell you something different, they would say there's no opening in there to say anything about Indra's net. They would probably say that. The conservative ones would. I think the more progressive ones would say, yeah, there's a way to Indra's net there, but like the real conservative, like Theravada teachers would say, he never had any intention of saying anything like that. He was just talking about the rising of self, suffering, and the cessation of suffering. That's all he was talking about, how to do that. And actually, the Prajnaparamitas, that's all they're talking about either, too, really. But it's a different perspective, a different, different time and culture. But one thing I could say about that too, it's about time to go. If you've ever watched my teacher give a lecture, he always does this thing of, what is it? 1 = 0 = infinity. He has this formula that he came up with some years ago. And so, it means, and I think it's actually really related to what we're talking about. The one is self, the self equals 0. And he said that was early Buddhism. That's what early Buddhism was saying, is that the self is empty. And then the equals infinity is what we get with Prajnaparamita Sutras in Mahayana Buddhism. He said, that was kind of an equation like that. It doesn't make sense just rationally in a way, but you can mix that up anywhere. You could, and if you think, I've thought about that before, you can say infinity equals 0 = 1, or you can mix it up. And I think there's a lot of different ways to see how it really applied to the early teachings too. The infinity is there. If those things are really equal, they're really there. Even when you see one is 0, if you dig a bit, you really see infinity too, I think. And I think there were teachings at the Buddha's time where people really, they got stuck in eternalism, for example. He was really trying to differentiate himself from like the Vedic tradition and say that that's not his teaching, So I feel like that's why he was really careful about that. But saying something really, really profound, like in that Katyayana Sutta, it's such a profound thing that any one of us can see in our daily life. The fact that the arising of one thing is the birth, the death of something else, and the emptiness of something else, and that these things can't be differentiated. And so, that's what I really love about that one, for example, is that is just the way our lives unfold. And the Buddha said, don't listen to me, take these teachings in and see for yourself that they, are true or not. In that one, I think it's very clear that it's just, you see emptiness in your life. We can see it all around us in a way. Seeing it isn't the right way to talk about it, but to understand that it is the way our lives unfold. It is our life. It's not something we see. It's something that we're not separate from. You're welcome. Yeah, thank you. So I think we're at the end of the time here, unless anybody had a final comment. Anything else? And thank you guys so much for being here and supporting each other and just showing up and participating. I really appreciate it, and I'm really enjoying it. And I look forward to seeing you again. All right, thank you very much.